to episode 3 of Protecting Your Investments. I'm Johnny Dykes, and I'll be your host. And today I'm joined by Dustin Gibson. Dustin is the water mitigation and mold mitigation manager for Lemonian Dryout and Foundation Repair. And he is going to tell us all about his division today and how fun it is and all of the wonderful things that he gets to experience and do. So, Dustin, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Johnny.
So, I guess tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell the audience.
Well, I have been in the water damage restoration, mold remediation industry for almost 20 years now. Late in 2004, I think it was, is when I got my start working for Mike Lemonian. I worked for him for only a couple of years, though, but I stayed in the industry as I moved through a different number of different companies in another state. And then I came back to work for Mike because his is the best company I've ever seen before.
Those are some pretty high praises. Mike pay you extra to say that?
Maybe in cookies.
He does make good cookies.
That's right.
He does. So since you kind of mentioned that you've been in the restoration industry for a while, what formed those opinions that Lemonian was the best?
It is solely based on the amount of education that Mike Lemonian has helped me to receive that is specifically related to what we're doing in this industry. I could take my experiences at all the other companies I worked at and combine them, and it's not even a fraction what I've gained in a very short period of time from Lemonian.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of people probably don't know, even local people don't know about the company is, even for me, I obviously don't go out on a ton of water losses, but I've been certified both in mold inspecting and, to go out and clean up water mitigation and do it the right way, because that's what we want to do the right way.
Yep.
What, I guess, as far as all of your experience combined, what makes that education piece so vital? Because a lot of people, I think, look at water mitigation and they say, well, it's just cleaning up water.
Yep. And it is exactly what you said a moment ago, too. We want to do it the correct way. It not just involves the investment that people have into their property, that we want to help them maintain the value of that property. Having a water or a mold damage go untreated not only can cause damage, but it can lower the value of the property. We don't want to see that happen because we didn't do the job correctly, or because we allowed someone else to tell us how to do the job because we didn't know for sure how to do it. So what we want to do is to do it correctly, and getting that education is the most critical component of that, next to wanting to do it correctly.
I think that's well said. You have to want to do it the right way first.
Yep.
So I guess since we're talking about water losses, kind of walk me through walk the audience through, I guess I should say, what happens when you first arrive on a water loss? What's, they've called into the office. Oh no, I've got a pipe that's burst. I've got a flooded basement. Or we could even talk about what happens if it's a sewage loss. I guess we could talk about both. But what do you guys do when you first get there?
So the very first thing that we do is conduct an inspection. First thing we want to know is everything safe? Is everybody safe? There weren't any injuries at the time the damage was discovered or when it happened. And then as we proceed into the area that has been affected by the water or the sewage, we want to make sure that we are safe. Just taking into consideration alone what happens when you mix electricity and water. You want to make sure you're not walking into a situation where those two are mingled together, because you only get to find that out once. So you have to make sure everything is safe And then what we do is we proceed with an inspection.
Okay. So I guess that kind of goes along with OSHA.
Uh,
Instead of putting on the PEPE first, make sure there's no hazards around
Yep.
you.
And if there are, eliminate them. That's
Yeah.
actually the first step in OSHA's process, is
Yeah.
to eliminate the hazard if at all possible.
Yeah. Don't work around it.
Yep.
Just get rid of it.
Yep.
Yeah. Very true. So I guess what does that look like once you've established it's safe? We can move forward. What's that dry out process look like?
So the first thing we want to do is we have to figure out where the water is hiding. Now, one of my original schools that I went to, I learned the term smart water and dumb water. Both types of water are playing a game of hide and seek with you. Dumb water standing out in the open saying, I'm right here. The smart water is actually hiding from you. And that's the water that's the most dangerous because it's inside of wall cavities, underneath of cabinets, and in other hard to view places where without the access to moisture detection equipment, you wouldn't know it was there. If you just set a fan up and dried out the water that you can see on the floor, you might think you were okay. Which then later on you can find out you weren't because there's mold growing on the drywall, or you're smelling foul odors, or there's other complications, wood rot, for instance. So our goal is to address the water that's there in the room, standing there visible, but also to find that smart water and to get it dried out before it has a chance to cause a problem.
I like the saying smart water and dumb water. I think it's pretty it's descriptive. It's an easy thing to remember.
Yep.
So you're gonna find dumb water pretty easy. That smart water though can look dry after you get done. And then you go and my drywall saggy, you know, it's a mess.
And you have to consider that when I talk about moisture detection equipment, I am not talking about your hand. We're 98% water, which means something can still be very wet but feel dry to the touch.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a really good point. Speaking of equipment, I know you brought some stuff to kind of share with everybody. You want to talk
Sure.
about some of your toys, gadgets?
Yes, I would. So these are all basic. I shouldn't say basic. They're high tech. They're expensive meters, moisture detection meters. All of them perform some basic functions, finding moisture. And it does that in different. Each one of these meters does that in a different way.
Yeah. The FLIR camera alone is a pretty pricey piece of equipment.
Yep.
By itself.
It's not as much. It doesn't cost as much as it used to, but it's a vital instrument. It's not a moisture detection instrument, however. It only tells us using colors on the screen where there's a temperature differential.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're reading a wall at a certain temperature, let's just say 80 degrees, and then we see a blue spot on the wall and it's measuring 60 degrees, well, that's a good indication that something's going on in that wall, which you may not see with the naked eye. You're seeing it with the camera now, but let's just suppose there's an air conditioning vent that's blowing right on the wall right there. That could be a reason for it being for it having that blue spot, that cooler spot. And it could be that wall is wet right there, and the moisture is, and the air going across the surface is causing the temperature to be lowered. So it's a critical tool for finding out where you might find the moisture, but you still need these other moisture meters to be able to determine if you have water there.
Okay. So that's kind of a non-invasive, just looking around, seeing where your cold spots are.
Yep. Helps eliminate. It's like having somebody in a game of hide and seek stand there and point to where you should be looking.
It's good. It's a good way of putting it too. So what other moisture meters did you bring? What's kind of, I guess, if you find those cold spots, what's your next tool you're going to in your Batman belt?
So let's just say carpet. This is a very basic. It's actually called a wet check.
Oh,
and just takes 2 pins, and if you touch it to something wet, you're going to get a little beep, 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 and that means it's wet. all this is good for is saying, yes, it's wet or it's dry.
Now,
It doesn't tell us how wet it is, but it tells us if it's wet. This is the perfect tool for checking to see where the carpet is wet.
yeah. Dustin doesn't have wet hands. It's because, like he mentioned before, he is made of 98% water, like all of us are. So it is going to pick up, and that can be an issue if you were to get your hands too close to those pins.
Yes.
Or
Yep.
so.
You have to know where you're supposed to put your own
Yeah.
hands as you use the meter.
Don't hold it by the pins and then try to do it.
Yep. And then we have probably my favorite, which is a Moisture Encounter Plus. This is a non-invasive meter.
Oh yeah.
It basically just once you turn it on, you have a scale 0 to 100 here. When you touch it to something that's wet, it lets you know that it's wet and how wet it is depending on what you put it on. So if I put it on the wall here, I don't know if you can see that on camera, but the needle moved just a little bit. All material has moisture in it. Is it at a dangerous level? And that's what knowing what the numbers on the meter are telling us it is beneficial to have that knowledge of how much moisture is too much and when is the moisture that it has going to be okay. And so we use that. We call that a non-invasive meter. And the other meters that I have sitting out on the table here perform those same functions, but in a different way. This funky looking one right here actually reads deeper into material than the other ones do, but will give us a good reading. This is a really good one for checking out hardwood floors because hardwood floors can be so thick.
Yeah.
This one is a concrete meter. It's specifically for using on concrete. We use this one that comes in this case right here that I have sitting here, has a bunch of different attachments that we can perform invasive metering with. The most popular one is just the one with the short pins on it here. Our favorite way of using this meter right here is with a set of stainless steel screws, which we will put into the seal plate on the bottom of the wall so that we can tell when the inside of that 2x4 that sits directly on the floor and was wettest for the longest has dried out. That's where the hardest to find smart water is inside those dense building materials. And the only way to know if you've got them is to get in there and see if you have dried them out.
And that's a really good point. You've got that 2x4 setting against the floor retaining water. I think a lot of people have this misconception just because it's inside the house that those 2x4s are maybe treated or something like that, and they're not. If you were to build a house with treated lumber, you would have 3 times the cost at a minimum, especially with material costs right now. So I think that's very important that you pointed that out, is getting into that, because you don't want that to start to rot. You don't want that to grow mold, and mold's going to, of course, eat it eventually. So not to mention all the wonderful health benefits of mold, or side effects maybe.
Yep.
So kind of segueing into mold, I guess. So let's say that somebody doesn't get it addressed right away. They don't treat it with an emergency status. They don't rush to give us a call or get it taken care of or call someone else. What's kind of the time frame for mold developing, and what does that look like?
Well, the time frame is, it used to be said that it could take up to 3 days for mold to begin to grow. But as is the case with almost every industry that humans are involved in, and the continued search for information and what to do with that information, the truth of the matter is that mold is everywhere. It's in the air we breathe. It's on every surface, everywhere. And all it takes to begin growing is for it to get wet. So the truth of the matter is that the moment materials get wet, fungal ecology begins. At the very beginning, though, we're not talking about anything that could or should be addressed
Yeah.
as a mold remediation, because there's not a significant amount of it there enough for anything to be done about it. So uh, it's when it becomes visible, and when it becomes visible is highly dependent upon how wet the materials are, and what the level of moisture is, how long those materials have been wet, and what the temperature is. So you can have a flooded structure in the wintertime get wet and take a significantly less amount of time to grow mold than the very same structure getting wet in the 100-degree heat with no air conditioning inside of the building. Mold
Yeah.
growth can start very quickly because that warmer temperature, along with the high humidity, moisture content, can cause that microbial activity to start a whole lot faster.
Yeah.
So there's not really a set time limit on how long it will take.
That's a good point though. It's all about getting it started right away because obviously, like you said, the fungal ecology starts to grow right away, and it's not anything that you're going to prevent by just cleaning up the water.
Yep.
So it's true. Um, so when it comes to the water mitigation or the mold remediation side, what what training does someone need, or what? And we've already briefly talked about training, but a little bit more in depth about what do they need to know? What steps do we take to get someone ready to go out and properly clean up and explain to the customers?
Well, one of the best things that I like about Lemunion as a company is that you have to get some experience, right?
Yeah.
It it makes learning in a classroom easier if you have some firsthand experience. So it's nice to bring people on board and give them some field experience, get them to see real world examples of what they're going to learn in a textbook when they take a class. I think that that's a critical part of learning. The more you have of that before you take a class, the better you're likely to test out at.
Yeah.
So when taking a class, I think it's important to look um, for myself at the organization that has done the most research and has actually set the standard of care when it comes to water damage mitigation and mold remediation. That is the IICRC. And I can't remember right off the top of my head what that stands for, but they are the organization that not only has produced the information on the standard of care when working on these jobs, but they are the ones who will will test and certify the technicians to be ready to show that we have that knowledge. Just a very basic rundown of what those classes teach an individual is at the very beginning. It's how to tell what's wet, how to tell what's dry, and how to know how you uh, how you can dry something out. So it's the difference between not only knowing what this meter is,
Mm-hmm.
but knowing how to use it, where to use it, and where not to use it. Then, if you graduate up into the next level of certification and training, you learn not only that is wet, but you know how long it should take to dry, and you know how many pieces and what kinds of equipment you should use to get that dry in that period of time. That involves learning some applied science when it comes to what happens to water, evaporation potential, and just knowing how to dry things out in the most efficient way.
Yeah. It's well said.
And then I will just add, mold remediation has its own certification. They call it AMRT certification, which is an applied microbial remediation technician. That is basically a when you take one of those classes, you learn a lot about what the OSHA regulations are when it comes to protecting you and other people who might be in the area where you're working while you're working with mold.
Yeah. Well, and from speaking from experience, taking the class for mold, if you've ever previously worked in industry and they've cleaned up mold, and then you take that class, you sit there and kind of go, "Oh, wow,
Did they do that right?
did they do that right?" And it's usually no. I think one of the interesting things, like you mentioned, is the education portion, and I keep coming back to this because I think it's so critical, like you said, um, because we don't want to just walk in and say, "Yep, that's wet," but we don't know where the water is. And the same thing is true for mold remediation. So, would you kind of walk us through what that looks like, the inspection process and the remediation process for mold?
So it all mold problems are caused by moisture problems. So the first thing that you do in a mold inspection is figure out what happened here. What was the water damage? Sometimes it's known, and sometimes it's not. But that's the first question you need to ask. If you want to fix the mold problem, you have to make sure that the moisture problem has been fixed. If it was a leaking pipe, did a plumber come and fix it? If it's a foundation issue, has the foundation issue been addressed? Because if the mold is there because water is coming in every time it rains, then doing a mold remediation right now is not going to be beneficial, because if you don't take care of the foundation issue, it's going to come back again. So it so what you have to do is perform a moisture inspection and evaluation at the same time you're looking at the visible mold growth, and then you look at the visible mold growth, but then you look at everywhere where the water might have gone, and you go inspect all of those areas as well. During that inspection, there's one instrument I have not picked up on the table yet. That's this very powerful 900 lumen flashlight, which I love. It is critical for looking at the surface
Mm-hmm.
of materials, walls especially. There are a lot of times with whatever dim lighting you have in a basement, and what you can actually see with that amount of lighting with your naked eye, and you look at that wall, might not look like anything is going on. But when you take your flashlight and shine it across the material like this, you will actually notice some white, almost translucent, fuzzy looking stuff on that surface. And now the amount of visible mold that is here because you're using this instrument
Mm-hmm.
has grown exponentially. And in a lot of cases, what we thought we were there to look at, and maybe under 10 square feet in size, has turned into something several hundred square feet in size, because of all of the stuff that the microbial growth that is on the wall surfaces that you can't see unless you have an instrument like this.
Yeah.
So it is, I always highly stress upon everyone who works with me that you have to carry one of those at all time. If you clean a surface, if you clean a hard surface, which is possible in mold remediation, and all you have to do is wipe it down, the only way you can tell if you did a good job after is to use your light to make
Yeah.
sure that nothing's on the surface anymore.
Well, and like you said, you don't want to light it from the front. You want to side light it, and that way you can see that separation and how much the growth is too. Yeah, I think that's actually you had showed me that before, and that's always interesting. You see something and you're almost looking at a 2D image, and that light really makes it pop out, and you go, "Wow,
Yep.
there's a lot there."
Yep. Yep.
So what you and I know we're kind of jumping back to water, but they go hand in hand, like you said. It's a moisture issue.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about what the categories of water are and why it's important not only to know why or what category you are dealing with, but maybe the PPE you should be wearing for said category of water.
Well, so the IICRC, which I mentioned just a few moments ago, has determined that there are 3 categories of water: 1, 2, and 3. They also identify them with the terms clean, gray, and black. And they also identify them as least amount of contamination, contaminated, and grossly contaminated. And you'll notice that a category 1 there is identified as the least amount of contamination. It does not say uncontaminated.
Yeah.
So as you look at what those definitions actually mean, you realize that in every water damage situation, PPE is going to be required. At the very least, on a category 1, when you touch wet building materials, you're going to want to put gloves on your hands to protect them. So category 1, a good example of category 1 water is water that came from a source that you could drink from at the source when the pipe broke. One of the biggest issues that uh, people have trouble understanding now is that as soon as it leaves that pipe, it begins to mingle with things that make that water no longer clean. When you have a 50-year-old structure that has dirt and dust mites and dead skin cells and all kinds of stuff in the wall cavity, even if it doesn't have mold growth, the water mingled with all of that as it flooded into the structure. That water's not drinkable anymore. Even if the carpet was brand new and you walked into a flooded structure, would you get down and consume any of the water on the floor?
I would not, but I'm pretty sure I know a couple guys that would do it for
on a dare. As long as somebody paid their medical bills if they got
exactly.
sick. So a category 1 just means that there's time is still of the essence. There's still a potential health hazard to consider with whatever the water mingled with. And then from there, we go to a category 2, give you a couple of really good definitions of what category 2 is. It's water that has contamination in it. Let's say you fill the clothes washing machine up with clothes, you put detergent in it, and it begins to fill with water, but it doesn't stop filling and it overflows. Mm-hmm. And so you have essentially what you would call dirty clothes water with some soap in it. That coming from that source is not a drinkable source, and it has some contamination in it. That water also mingles with all of the stuff in the building materials that we just spoke about, and that makes it contaminated water. That means at least some demolition is going to be required so that the surfaces behind what we remove can be properly cleaned and treated with an antimicrobial, which an antimicrobial is something that kills bacteria. Bacteria being allowed to be alive on a water damage is what leads to mold growth.
Yeah.
So then we get to number 3, what they call grossly contaminated, and I'll just say the 2 words raw sewage.
Yeah.
However, sewage water does not have to smell, and it can be clear. It can be clear as the water that you get out of the faucet. It does not have to smell like anything or look like anything for it to be considered raw sewage.
Yeah.
That is something that we find that we really have to impress upon people, especially when it is just water that came from their sewage pipe, but it doesn't smell or look like anything. It's hard to convey the importance of how that needs to be treated sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. People don't want to necessarily deal with, obviously raw sewage is a lot, I don't want to say more major issue, but there's a lot more health effects that can happen a lot more quickly. And I think people say, well, I don't see anything floating in it. It's fine. But back to your point, would you drink it?
Yeah.
And if you would, you're going to need that dare money because you're going to be in really dire straits.
Yep.
For those that don't necessarily understand why it's so devastating to have raw sewage, would you mind explaining What lives beyond the trap? We could do a Twilight episode.
What lives beyond the trap is an entire army of pathogenic means disease causing,
Yeah.
In the realm of possibilities, there's considered to be over 2,000 different kinds of disease causing bacteria that can live inside of sewage pipes, and most of them are microscopic.
Mm-hmm.
You will not know if those disease causing bacteria are in that water. And that makes it especially dangerous when it's an odorless and a colorless water that is gotten your structure wet. Because if you dry that out rather than getting those wet materials moved out of there, as the moisture evaporates, so do the bacteria. When they evaporate, they go up into the air, and you breathe them in.
Yes.
And that is where you get into trouble.
Yeah, that's I think that's a good way of putting it. It makes me think of if you go camping. I've known people that would go camping near a river and they would just simply go down, get some water, make sure it's not got anything floating in it, and they would drink it. A lot of people, what they don't realize with that is if you have say a horse crossing the stream 2-3 miles upstream and it drops some droppings in the stream,
Mm-hmm.
you can actually become extremely sick just due to that. And you're talking about a water that's moving nonstop, and it doesn't really have time for anything additional to grow in it aside from what's already in there. But it's just the fact that those droppings are in that water, on top of all the other stuff that's in a naturally occurring pool. So yeah, I think it's really important that people treat it with the urgency and the seriousness that it has.
Which, just coming from the perspective of a employee at a restoration company, when the employee from the restoration company tells you about all of the safety concerns and precautions that they're going to take, fully suiting up in a watertight suit, rubber gloves on their hands, full face respiratory protection, which means they're going to be breathing filtered air while they're working down there, then you being down there without any of that protection on should be a very serious indicator that you are not in a safe position.
Yeah, and you kind of beat me to the punch. That was my next question: is what protective equipment do you need? So for each level, you would obviously wear the appropriate stuff, like you mentioned, full face respirator. What other, I guess, based on the level, what equipment would you use? So you're not going to use that all on a level 1 loss.
No. And so, you might wear PPE on a, you will wear that watertight PPE whenever you're working with sewage, because you don't want any of that getting to you at all.
Now they just wear that because it's comfortable, right?
Yeah,
it's nice.
Yeah, I would say if you want to lose some weight really fast, but you're going to want to drink all that back as soon as you're done getting out of that suit. It is hot. It is not comfortable. It is not worn for style or comfort. It is worn for protection, and that should be a good indicator there that it's serious, because you have to do it no matter how hot it is. You have to wear that protection. So,
and just to point out what Dustin's talking about, it's like watching the movies where the guys are in full hazmat suits. That's essentially what it is. You want that dermal protection because you don't want that raw sewage splashing up on your arm and being able to transfer from the outside of your skin, because it is a protective layer, but into your bloodstream or being absorbed. Which when you're working in a nice warm environment, your pores are more open, you're more susceptible to it too. So
absolutely.
I know no one likes to wear those. I've had to experience the full face respirators aren't too bad, honestly. But the suits are hot and they're not comfortable.
They restrict your movement.
They do.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that's like you said, it's if we're wearing that in an area, you probably shouldn't be down there in your house shoes and with your mug of coffee checking it out.
Yep.
So,
Yep. And really, so on any category of water, there might be some uh, personal protective equipment, PPEs, that people are wearing. Just even if you're just removing some drywall because it got so wet that it's not adhered to the wall or to the ceiling anymore, you're probably just going to wear some PPEs. Number one, because I spoke to you about what's inside of wall cavities,
yeah.
the old dust and dust mites and, creepy crawlies, and maybe a rodent was inside the wall cavity, and there's actually contaminated, like gross contamination inside of there. You don't know if you're going to find it when you first begin, so you need to protect yourself. But just also about keeping that stuff off of your clothing,
Yeah.
which could, if it got on your clothing and then you had to go from one customer's house to another that day, about protecting the next customer so that you don't carry something from this house into the next house.
That's a good point. It's a good point because it's not like it's going to stay behind just because you leave that job
Yep.
site.
Yep.
So maybe that's why we change attire so often when it comes to the job.
That and the sweating.
And the sweating doesn't help. So we're talking about water. We're talking about the different levels of water. So I know you'd already said mold is really a moisture issue.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have someone, let's say they don't have a level 1 through 3 water break, no water from the outside, but they have mold growth and they know it's moisture. What can they do to prevent that moisture? What would be the steps that a homeowner could look and say, okay, I need to call someone to have this professionally inspected? Maybe they don't have mold growth yet. Um, what's something that they would look for?
Just humidity. A lot of times where we find mold where there hasn't been a water leak is in bathrooms. And 99.9% of the time, it is because that fan in the bathroom is either non functional or it's not functioning properly.
Yeah.
Those fans are meant to evacuate the humidity out of there whenever someone showers or uses the sink or whatever, uses the hot water, and you have that steam rising to the ceiling. If you're not evacuating that quick enough, that moisture will stay on the surface of the ceiling and begin to grow mold right there on the surface. And so that's probably the most common place where we see mold issues, where there has been no plumbing leak. But it's just caused by being exposed to high humidity over and over again. And the best way to get rid of that issue is to get a contractor in who can install a properly functioning fan. And maybe that's something you know how to do on your own, but it also needs to be vented properly. Quite often we find that those fans are installed to vent directly into the attic space, and that just transfers the humidity from the bathroom into the attic, and you have the mold problem up there instead of down in the bathroom, and that becomes a whole nother, often more expensive problem to solve.
Yeah.
Because doing mold remediation in an attic is actually a confined space, and there's a whole new set of OSHA standards when it comes to how you perform that work.
Yes, and nobody likes getting in the attic.
And nobody likes getting in the attic. They're over 150 degrees in the summertime, so quite often we can't do mold remediation in the summertime.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's I knew you were going to touch on the point that it has to be vented out, not vented into the attic.
Yep.
Because unfortunately that is something that we do see.
Yep.
Quite often. So yeah, or it never hurts in the spring or the fall to go up and make sure that it's actually vented out and you haven't had it fall off or become damaged.
Yeah,
so
that can happen.
Yeah. I've actually got to see some of those, and it's kind of funny when you look at it and you're like, why did they attach this with a zip tie? Well, because it was easy and convenient. They didn't have to go back downstairs.
Yep.
So, when someone's looking for a restoration company, say maybe they're not in Kansas, and they can't use us, what's something that they should be looking for? I know we've kind of given a lot of information so far, and I think there's a little bit more to give. But um, what would you say the key factors are?
Well, ever since we talked about doing this podcast, I have been working on an article that is 10 questions you should ask a restoration company.
Ooh.
I got the idea from another restoration company in another state, but I'm modifying the answers to those questions to something that is more relevant to our area. And I just have a rough draft here, so I might just tell you some of the
Yeah,
questions that are on it here. Um, it is very good to know whether or not the company that you're looking at hiring is licensed and bonded. Um, do they have certifications and are they insured? It is also a very good idea to see how quickly they can get somebody on site. Um, so just because somebody is immediately available does not mean that they're a great company, because that might be an indication of how much work they're getting based off of their
yeah,
reputation. So it's good to just ask that question and then kind of gauge what your feelings are about the company based on the reply that they give you. Um, uh, it's also good to ask them about if they provide any warranties. Now, the answer to that may be no, but their reason why may be very logical, and it may be that they are demonstrating that they know what they're talking about, even if they say no. Uh, Asking them about what experience they have. Sometimes we like to take to Google and see what a company's reviews are, but it's good to just ask them directly if they have any references of customers that they have worked for, and see what those experiences have been like. Again, when you ask a company that you're looking at hiring these questions, the amount of information and the attitude in which they answer you will often say a lot about that
yeah.
company. So,
Maybe more than they want to tell you up front.
yeah, yeah, maybe not even asking them for experiences of past customers, but ask them the question, what would your past customers say about the work you do? And again, I won't speculate on what answers you know uh, anyone could or should say, but how they say it and how much information they give you is a good indication
Yeah,
of how they feel about you as a customer.
yeah. Do you have any more?
I do have more. So it's
Yeah,
10
no,
it's 10
continue. Yeah,
questions. Does your company have a local office? Are you just available for emergency work? And also, does your company do more than just dry out my property? Good information to have. Again, if a company, I will tell you right now, Lemunion doesn't provide reconstruction
yeah,
services because we consider it a better use of our time to specialize in making sure that the structure is ready to be put back together without any moisture or mold concerns at the time that it's ready to be put back together. That again comes down to making sure that everything is 100% dry and ready to put back together. And let me just go back and correct myself. When I say 100% dry, I don't mean 0% moisture content. I just mean that it isn't worth having drying equipment there
right.
anymore to dry it out, and that it's the materials have gone back to what they more naturally hold on to as a for a level of moisture.
Yeah, and that way it's safe, like you said, to put those materials back. You're not enclosing moisture that's going to then cause mold growth or
Yep.
other issues.
Yep.
No, I think those are great. I think that's good information. And like you said, I really kind of caught on to that first point you made about how busy are you,
Mm-hmm.
because we know that we stay busy. There's it doesn't have to be a major weather event. There doesn't have to be a hurricane or a tornado or flooding. That people have water losses all the time. They have collapsed sewer lines in the summer because trees are seeking water and it's really dry, and they get in there and they find water.
Yep.
and they can drink that water,
Yep.
unlike you. Um, but I think that is a good point because you don't want somebody that's a fly by night doing it on the side, doesn't really know what they're doing. Yeah, sure, I'll come dry it out. I've got two air movers and a maybe a DHU, and I just jump in there and start tearing stuff out.
So, and just to go, when you said fly by night, that was one of the things I found in this article, especially with the amount of natural disasters that we're having these
Yeah,
days. There are a lot of fly by night companies that are basically like storm chasers, and they go to the different coastal towns and areas where hurricanes happen, and then they follow other weather events across the country, and they don't really stay in one place. Which I mean, disaster teams are a critical component of what needs to be taken care of after a disaster. But some
yeah,
there are mixed in there some contractors who are not concerned with the quality of their work as
yeah,
they move because they're not staying. And it's important to know who you're dealing with in order to ensure that they do the best job for you. Um, yeah, I had another point, but I forgot what it was.
yeah. That's okay. Well, and that kind of comes back to part of our core values and our our company mottos. We're gonna compassionately restore homes.
Yep.
Um,
Oh, I just remembered my
yeah, go
point. So
ahead.
let me
No,
go
go
along
ahead.
with that with core values, wanting to do things correctly, wanting to be honest and integral. A question that you can ask the restoration company that will tell you a lot is asking them to tell you how many days it will take to dry the structure out. If they give you a specific time, they may not be acting with the best information available. Because the truth of the matter is that while it won't take forever, and while it does take significantly less than it used to, it
Mm,
is difficult to determine how each different situation will turn out. There are so many different variables that play into how well you can dry a structure out. It's actually not possible to determine exactly how much time it will take to dry a structure out. Therefore, if you have anyone talking to you about your specific water damage situation that offers speculation on how long the dry out should take, they don't have all the information.
yeah. So you're saying if they have, or if they're advertising like a dry in 3 guarantee type thing, that's probably not the guys to call.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because um, we do focus a lot on integrity as a company and with each individual staff member, and um, yeah, it's way better to under promise and over deliver. So it's a good point, Dustin.
When I am specifically speaking to a customer, I tell them what I would like to do is communicate with you every day. I think that that's important for a
Yeah,
contractor to do, and I will let you know how much progress the materials make by sharing with you what the numbers are from these meters. On the very first day, we should be able to establish a goal for where we want to be, and then every time we are there to check on the progress of the drying, show you how far away we are from the goal.
yeah,
And then when we're not at the goal today, talk about where we would like to see the numbers go by the next time we visit. And rather than speculating on how long that'll take, just assuring you that what we want to do is leave our drying equipment here until we can confirm that everything is dried out.
yeah. Well, and I think, like you said, communicating every single day, showing where you're at on the meters. Um, but like for you, you do a lot of work on the back end too for post remediation to provide all the documentation, so they have that, and they can say, okay, this is what was done, and obviously you do line item by line item, and that way people understand really what they're paying for. And I think that's probably important too. If you have someone come in to do a remediation or a mitigation, to maybe ask them for an estimate. And if it's just labor, materials, and that's it, then you might be getting some extra cost in there that you're not.
you're not,
not aware of.
and not responsible
Yeah.
for paying for.
Yeah. It's a very good point. So, um, is there anything special or specific that you feel like a customer needs to know when it comes to a water loss when they're maybe dealing with their insurance agent or adjuster, or how to go about dealing with that? Because I think a lot of people tend to look at it as, I'm going to call my agent, they're going to tell me exactly what to do. And a lot of times they may not necessarily know those steps or the
Mm-hmm.
proper steps to take.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and this is something I'm very close to, as I am on the back end. I work with getting getting final reports done, final reviews done, getting invoices generating, and being ready to defend what it is that we're charging for, whether it be to a customer or to an insurance company. And what I can say is that the insurance industry is a changing industry right now.
Yeah.
Different news headlines are proving that. And the biggest thing I want customers to know about when it comes to your insurance policy is, I stress the word your. It's your
Yeah.
policy. Um, you are financially obligated to pay for that policy, which means that you own it just like you do your car, your house, or any other possession that you purchased. You purchased that policy. And the best way to ensure when you have a claim that it gets paid out correctly is for you to maintain a hands on attitude when
Yeah.
it comes to managing your policy. I'm not talking about micromanaging or managing the people who are doing work for you. I'm talking about managing your policy. Um, Several people involved can speculate on what their insurance has paid for. That's a different insurance company. That's a different policy. It's not your policy.
Right.
Their situation maybe have been completely different from yours, and therefore their opinions are irrelevant because they're not going to help you. Um, it is it you know adjusters, they, I feel sorry for these guys. They get stacks of folders from people who have turned in claims. They have to investigate them. They get very little time to do that in. They have to make sure that they are investigating each situation
Mm-hmm.
as to the best that they can. But it is, they're overworked.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times, if you want to make sure that you are getting the fullest benefit from your policy when you turn in a claim, you are often going to have to manage that yourself,
Yeah.
and make sure that they are aware of what you know is in your policy. And there are several things in there that may not come out just because you turned in a claim.
Yeah. Well, I think that's good to point out. All of that is good to point out. I have some sympathy for insurance adjusters because I know they are overworked and their job is to really go through claims with a fine tooth comb because they're responsible for saving the insurance company money.
Yep.
That's really what their job is. It'd be a lot longer job title if that was the case, but adjuster sounds better.
Yep.
But that's, they're doing their job because people do file false claims all the time, and
Yep.
so that's their responsibility. But I do think it's important, like you said, that people understand that's your claim. You own that claim, or you
Yep.
own that policy, I should say, and it's your responsibility to understand it. Just like it's your responsibility to get your oil changed, your tires rotated. It's the same thing. And I think a lot of people, when it comes to insurance, they buy a policy and then it's all of a sudden a hands-off approach. I
Yep.
don't have to do anything else. I'm just going to pay my monthly. And then if something happens, hopefully not, but if something happens, they're going to take care of it.
Yep.
And I think you've shared with me a couple times where insured are really shocked at how hands-on they have to be.
Yep.
Because nobody's coming to take care of it for you.
Yep.
They'll just provide to make you whole financially.
And I think that's, it's in the past, insurance policies, and when somebody turns in a claim, they have had a good experience where somebody came contractor came and just took care of
Yeah.
everything, and so there's a perception there sometimes that they're just going to put it in the hands of, they turn in the claim and they're going to pay their deductible, and now they're not involved in it anymore. um, that's certainly a choice that you can make. However, when you do that, you're giving away the financial freedom that you have available to you with that policy and putting it in someone else's hands. It's not their policy, so they're just going to do everything they can to get it closed out as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And that may not be something that the end product may not be something that you're happy with. And really, you bought that insurance policy so that you can be made happy again after you turn in a claim when something happens. So because it's your policy, you really have to maintain that control.
Yeah. I agree. I think that's a good point. No, don't obfuscate your responsibilities
Yep.
just because you don't want to deal with it.
Yep.
So, because you will end up paying for it if you have a major loss and you don't keep control of it, like you said.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
or even a minor loss, I guess.
Even, just when you say pay for it, it can be a financial thing, and
Mm-hmm.
it can also be just not getting the materials,
Yeah.
not getting your house put back together the way it was before, and not being satisfied with the product, and then not being able to do anything about it.
Yeah.
That could be how you pay for it too.
That's very true. Well, Dustin, just as we wrap up here, what if you were going to tell somebody that was interested in the restoration industry? Maybe they like math, they like science. I think it's pretty cool. I came here from a completely different industry, and I find it fascinating. I'm learning stuff all the time, so it's very neat. And Dustin's a great teacher. If you guys are looking for a job and you are interested in water,
I
come
do
check
my
us out.
best.
Yeah, you do a great job. Um, what is your favorite part of your job as the mitigation manager?
Teaching.
Teaching.
Yep. I
Yeah.
love sharing my experiences. I usually have to tell people, if you need me to be quiet, just tell me, because I will start talking. One of my favorite things when I speak to customers, and I don't mean this in a desensitized way, is to try to reassure them by telling them I've seen worse before,
Yeah.
and I always have, and I like sharing the experience of what I've seen that's worse before, not as a way of minimizing what they're going through, but just to kind of show them that all kinds of people are going through
Yeah.
this, and this it also, in sharing an experience, tells them that I've been through this before. Even if I have questions about what to do on your specific situation, I know where to get the answers to those questions. And these experiences have taught me this. So there are, even if I need further information, I have a good idea on where not to go on the way to figuring out where to go.
Yeah.
And I love sharing that information with the guys who are working with me, and to you, even though we don't work in the same department. I love sharing my experiences because I get a great amount of satisfaction from telling about my experiences and teaching people.
Yeah. I'd say you're pretty good at it. So,
Thank you.
well, Dustin, I think that's all of our time for today. So, thank you for coming. We'll have to have you back and go over some more stuff.
I would love it.
All
Thanks,
right.
Johnny.
Thank you.